So this next exercise is called organic forms with contour lines. The premise of it is, or at least the idea of what a contour line is, rather, is that it is a line that sits and runs along the surface of a three-dimensional form. By doing so, it helps us to understand how that surface actually turns in 3D space. So if you had a sausage form like this, these curves help demonstrate how that surface is turning through 3D space. And while we're not always going to be able to just draw arbitrary curves and lines on a form where they really shouldn't be present, there are a lot of details and a lot of different information that you can leverage that essentially serve the same purpose. Like in an insect, you'll likely have a lot of segmentation in their exoskeleton. Something like this. And while it's a little bit more complex than a simple curve, it does leverage the same idea. And as a result, you can tell that this form is curving and turning this way. So the exercise itself is very simple. There's two parts to it. First, we explore drawing contour ellipses. And then we explore drawing contour curves. So we start off by drawing a simple organic sausage form. That one's not very good. Try and keep it nice and bulbous, but make sure that it has a very direct and clear flow. So this one kind of flows in this direction. And this line is essentially showing us how it's basically a cylinder, but it's got like rounded edges. So it's a very directional form. And this line of flow here, it can serve as a very useful tool when we're adding actual ellipses to it, because it essentially represents our minor axis. If you remember from the anatomy of an ellipse that's covered in the lesson and in some of the videos. This way, I think. I'm just rotating it because on my Cintiq, it's rather tricky to find a comfortable angle to draw these ellipses, since I can't rotate it as easily as a page. I could rotate the canvas, but it would mess up my drawing setup, or my recording setup. So anyways, the idea here is that you want to draw an ellipse that fits between these 2 points and that aligns roughly to this minor axis, so that the minor axis cuts through each ellipse, into 2 equal symmetrical halves. There's one. And another thing that I do like to do when drawing these is that I will always add a smaller one on one of the ends, because that shows us that this form is facing, like which direction it's facing. By adding that little detail, you can tell that this form is facing this way and this side is facing away from us. Another important thing on being vaguely aware of is the fact that I'm not necessarily keeping the degrees of my ellipses. If you remember, that's the width of the ellipse. Like this is a smaller degree, this is a larger degree, this is an even larger degree. I'm not keeping them consistent all the way through. This one is a little bit wider, this one's a little bit narrower, and so on. The reason for this is that The degree of an ellipse, as I've discussed in other videos, is essentially what tells you about the orientation of the circle that it represents in 3D space. So again, if you picture a coin, I'll use my little ellipse guide tool for this. If you picture a coin that is facing you here, it's just going to be a perfect circle. But if you then were to turn it in space, it would start to get narrower. Until eventually it got very flat when it was turned 90 degrees. So the same principle applies here, where the degree of the ellipse tells us what the orientation of this particular cross-section of the organic form is going to be. So that allows a viewer to kind of discern what they're looking at. And it's all about visual communication. We're communicating a scene to the viewer. So these kinds of hints allow the viewer to better understand how things are oriented in space and whether or not this organic form is turning towards them, turning away, or how that's changing through the length of the form. So the other version of this, which you'll do once you've got a solid grasp of the contour ellipses, is essentially taking the same idea of the contour ellipses and just drawing the side of that ellipse that is facing us, which results in just a curve. So the ellipse itself would have been going all the way around, but obviously we don't have X-ray vision, so we also want to be able to practice seeing the curve only on the side that's facing us. And so we follow the same steps. We use a minor axis still, because technically we're still drawing a portion of a larger ellipse. Drawing a pole is still completely valid and actually a good idea to help orient the viewer in relation to this object. And then And so you can see that I've hooked around my line just a little bit. That's actually very useful, especially at this stage, because a lot of people have trouble where they are drawing contour curves kind of like this, where they very clearly do not wrap fully around the edge of the form. Those curves really need to be accelerating as they reach the edge, and then kind of giving the impression that they're hooking back around along the other side. But a lot of people will have trouble with that, and we'll just have them kind of shoot off like this. And that does not sell the illusion that we're after. So hooking them and overextending them a little bit, overshooting them is what I usually call it, can help kind of bridge the gap between a full ellipse and a curve. And so by doing this, you're forcing yourself to do the kind of hooking around thing. And then over time, like training wheels, we will kind of reel this back, and eventually we'll just be doing a simple curve. And that's basically the gist of the exercise. I do see a lot of people trying to overcomplicate the exercise by making all kinds of weird little forms. I don't really want you to be doing this, because it's only going to make the exercise that much more confusing. At this point, you have to accept that no matter how much experience you have, you are going to gain the most by tackling things in their simple stages. If you do a shit ton of these simple sausages, you will ultimately know how to tackle this. But if you try and jump in by tackling the more complicated approach, you will end up more than likely not being able to focus properly on the main core of the exercise. And as a result, we'll be too kind of preoccupied with, okay, how do I deal with these extra arms and stuff, and won't get the proper and fuller understanding of what contour lines really are. So give the exercise a shot. The homework, as always, is listed on the lesson page, which I'll include in the description below. And yeah, I hope that helps clarify some of those pitfalls.